There is a quiet kind of suffering that most people never talk about. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself loudly. It just sits there, in the back of your mind, like a low hum you have learned to ignore. It is the feeling of knowing, deep in your bones, that you are capable of far more than what your days currently show. You go to sleep at night with a list of things you meant to do. You wake up in the morning with the best intentions. And then, somehow, the hours slip through your fingers like water, and by evening you are left holding nothing but the vague ghost of another wasted day. That feeling, that specific, quiet ache of unrealized potential, is what Arnold Bennett sat down to address when he wrote Mental Efficiency. And what he had to say about it has not aged a single day. Arnold Bennett was not a philosopher in the academic sense. He was not sitting in a university tower, disconnecting from real life so he could theorize about it. He was a working writer, a man who understood what it meant to juggle responsibilities, to feel the pull of distraction, to want more from himself and from his hours than life seemed willing to give. He wrote Mental Efficiency at a time when the world was accelerating, when cities were growing, when ordinary men and women were finding themselves with more stimulation, more noise, and more demands on their attention than any previous generation had faced. And yet, he argued, the answer was not to slow the world down. The answer was to sharpen the mind that had to live in it. This is a book about self-mastery. But not the cold, joyless kind. Not the kind that tells you to wake up at 4 in the morning and punish your body into submission. Bennett's vision of mental efficiency is warm. It is human. It is built on the understanding that the mind is not your enemy. It is your greatest asset, and most people have simply never been taught how to use it properly. Let us start where Bennett himself starts, with a simple, almost uncomfortable observation. Most people, he says, use only a fraction of their mental capacity. Not because they are unintelligent, not because they lack talent, but because they have never made a conscious, deliberate decision to cultivate the mind they already have. They drift, they react, they allow circumstance and habit and the opinions of other people to shape how they spend their mental energy. And over time, this drift calcifies into a kind of permanent mediocrity that feels, falsely, like fate. Bennett was not cruel about this. He did not write to make people feel bad. He wrote because he believed, with genuine passion, that the ordinary person, the person working a regular job, raising a family, living an ordinary life, had within them the raw material for something extraordinary. The gap between where most people are and where they could be is not a gap of talent. It is a gap of method. Think about the last week of your life. Not a particularly special week, just an ordinary one. How many hours did you have? 168 hours in a 7-day week. Of those, perhaps 56 went to sleep. Perhaps 50 or 60 went to work. That still leaves somewhere between 50 and 60 hours. 50 to 60 hours of time that belongs, in theory, to you. What happened to them? Where did they go? Bennett asked this question not to accuse, but to awaken. Because the answer, for most people, is a vague and slightly uncomfortable mixture of television, aimless scrolling, idle conversation, and activities that left no trace. Not necessarily bad activities, but activities engaged in without intention, without awareness, and therefore without any lasting benefit to the mind or the character. This is the first great lesson of mental efficiency. Time is not the problem. You have enough time. What you may not have, yet, is a relationship with your own mind that allows you to use that time in a way that actually builds something. Now, let us talk about what that relationship looks like, and how you begin to build it. Bennett believed that the mind, like a muscle, responds to training. But here is where he parts ways with a lot of the harsher self-improvement advice of his era, and of ours. He did not believe in brute force. He did not believe in sheer willpower applied like a hammer. He believed in something more elegant and more durable. He believed in the cultivation of mental habits, small, consistent practices that, over time, reshape the architecture of how you think. There was a man Bennett wrote about, a composite of many men he had observed, who had always wanted to learn French. For years, this man told himself he would learn French when things settled down, when work eased up, when the children were older, when life gave him more space. And of course, life never gave him more space, because life does not do that. Life fills every space you give it. The man died knowing a handful of French phrases and carrying the low, persistent disappointment of something permanently unfinished. Bennett's argument was not that this man lacked time. It was that this man had never made a real decision. He had made a wish. And wishes, without method, without the construction of a genuine habit, remain wishes forever. The difference between a wish and a decision, in Bennett's framework, is this: a decision comes with a plan for the next 24 hours. Not a plan for someday. A plan for tomorrow morning. A plan for the 20 minutes before the household wakes up. A plan for the train ride into work. Real decisions are always specific. They are always immediate. And they are always accompanied by a willingness to protect that time from the thousand small thieves that will try to steal it. This is where the concept of mental efficiency begins to take on real texture. Efficiency, in Bennett's sense, is not about doing more things. It is about doing the right things, with full attention, and with the understanding that the quality of your mental engagement with an activity matters infinitely more than the quantity of time you spend on it. An hour of genuinely focused reading does more for the mind than 3 hours of distracted, half-present page turning. 20 minutes of real, undivided practice at a skill does more than an afternoon of going through the motions while your mind is somewhere else entirely. We live in a world that has, if anything, made this harder than it was in Bennett's time. The devices in our pockets are specifically engineered to fragment our attention. Every notification, every ping, every scroll is a tiny interruption, and interruptions are the great enemy of mental efficiency. Not because interruptions are evil, but because the mind needs time to reach its best operating state. There is a depth of thinking, a quality of engagement, that only becomes available after you have been with one thing for a sustained period. The best thoughts, the most creative connections, the clearest insights, they do not arrive in the first 5 minutes. They arrive after you have been patient enough to let the surface noise settle. And if you are constantly pulled away before that settling can happen, you spend your entire mental life skimming the surface, never reaching the richness that lies beneath. Bennett understood this intuitively. He wrote about what he called the quality of attention, and he argued that developing this quality was the single most important thing a person could do for their intellectual life. Not reading more books, not taking more courses, not acquiring more information. Developing the ability to actually be present with what is in front of you, fully, genuinely, without the restless seeking of stimulation that characterizes a poorly trained mind. Let us pause here and sit with something, because this is important. There is a kind of restlessness that our culture teaches us to mistake for ambition. The person who is always moving, always consuming, always filling silence with noise, they can seem energetic and productive from the outside. But Bennett would say, and I think he would be right, that this restlessness is often a symptom of a mind that has never learned to be still, and that a mind which cannot be still cannot think deeply, and a mind that cannot think deeply cannot produce its best work. True mental efficiency is not frantic. It is calm. It is directed. It is the energy of a river flowing with purpose, not the chaos of a flooded field scattering in all directions. So how do you begin to cultivate this quality of attention? Bennett offers something beautifully practical here. He suggests starting not with grand gestures but with the simplest possible practice. Choose one thing, each day, and give it your complete attention for a defined period of time. It does not matter what the thing is. It could be reading a page of a book. It could be working through a mathematical problem. It could be sitting quietly and thinking through one idea from beginning to end. The subject is less important than the practice itself. What you are training is not knowledge. You are training the capacity for sustained focus, and that capacity, once developed, transfers to everything else you do. Think of it like building a foundation. You cannot put a house on sand. And you cannot build a rich intellectual life on a mind that has never learned to stay with anything. The practice of daily, sustained attention is the foundation. Everything else, the learning, the creativity, the problem solving, the quality of your relationships and your work, all of it rests on that foundation. Now, let us talk about reading, because Bennett devoted significant attention to this, and it is one of the areas where his advice cuts most directly against what most people actually do. Most people, Bennett observed, read reactively. They read what is popular, what their friends are reading, what the newspapers recommend, what the algorithm surfaces. They read for entertainment, which is fine, but they do not read in a way that actually builds their minds. They consume words the way they consume fast food, quickly, without real attention, in a way that satisfies a momentary craving but leaves no lasting nourishment. And then they wonder why, despite all the reading they do not feel any wiser, any more capable, any more mentally equipped for the challenges of their lives. Bennett's prescription for reading was simple but demanding. Read deliberately. Read with a purpose. Before you open a book, ask yourself what you are hoping to get from it. Not in a transactional, joyless way, but in the way that a good traveler asks about a new country before visiting, with genuine curiosity and a desire to actually engage with what is there rather than just pass through. After you have read something, take a few minutes to sit with it. What did it say? What did it make you think? Do you agree? Why or why not? This active engagement with what you read is the difference between information that passes through you and knowledge that becomes part of you. He also argued, and this was slightly radical for his time and remains relevant for ours, that it is better to read a few books with real depth and attention than to race through many books superficially. The person who has read 10 books with genuine engagement and thought deeply about each one is, in Bennett's view, far better equipped than the person who has read 100 books while only half paying attention. It is the quality of the engagement, again, not the quantity. This does not mean you should read slowly for its own sake. It means you should read in a way that actually lands. There is a story worth telling here, not from Bennett's book directly, but in the spirit of everything he was arguing. There was a young woman, the daughter of a factory worker, who grew up in a small town with limited access to formal education. Her family was not wealthy. She could not afford university. But she had, from a young age, developed the habit Bennett describes, the habit of reading one thing at a time, with complete attention, and then sitting quietly afterward to think about what she had read. She kept a small notebook, not an elaborate journal, just a few lines after each reading session, her own thoughts, her own questions, her own connections to things she had read before. Over the years, this notebook became something remarkable. It became evidence of a mind that had been building itself, brick by brick, with nothing but time, attention, and the willingness to engage honestly with ideas. By the time she was 40, this woman had a depth of understanding about history, literature, human nature, and economics that would have impressed many university graduates. Not because she was a genius. Because she had been, in Bennett's exact sense, mentally efficient. She had used what she had, fully and consistently, rather than waiting for better conditions that might never arrive. This story matters because one of the most common reasons people give for not developing their minds is that they do not have the right circumstances. They do not have the right education, the right access, the right amount of free time. And Bennett's answer to this, gentle but firm, is that the circumstances are never going to be exactly right. There will always be a reason to wait. The question is whether you are willing to begin where you are, with what you have, now. This brings us to one of the most quietly radical ideas in the book, the idea that self-development is not a luxury. It is not something you do after you have handled everything else. It is the foundation from which everything else becomes more possible. The person who is mentally sharper handles their work better. The person who has cultivated their attention makes better decisions. The person who has developed the habit of genuine reflection makes fewer costly mistakes. Investing in your mind is not indulgent. It is the most practical thing you can do. Around the 10-minute mark of your journey through these ideas, it is worth taking a breath and appreciating something. This is not a book about talent. It is not a book about circumstances. It is a book about choices, specifically the choice to treat your own mind as something worth developing, rather than something to be merely maintained. And that choice is available to anyone, regardless of where they started. Please like and subscribe to Audiobook Library, because it genuinely helps this channel grow, and it means more summaries like this one can reach people who need them. Your support makes a real difference. Now, let us go deeper. Bennett had a great deal to say about the relationship between the mind and the body, and here again he was ahead of his time. He believed, without apology, that physical health was inseparable from mental efficiency. Not in a preachy way, not in the way that modern wellness culture can sometimes feel like a performance, but in the simple, practical recognition that a tired body houses a tired mind. A body that is never moved, never challenged, never given the chance to feel its own strength, tends to produce a mind that is sluggish, reactive, and prone to pessimism. And a mind in that state cannot do its best work. He wrote about the importance of sleep with an almost defiant insistence. In his time, as in ours, there was a culture that valorized sleeplessness, that treated the ability to function on little rest as a badge of seriousness. Bennett thought this was foolish. Not morally wrong, just strategically idiotic. The brain processes information during sleep. It consolidates learning. It repairs itself. The person who chronically shortchanges their sleep is not being productive. They are slowly eroding the very organ they depend on for everything they want to accomplish. A few extra hours of wakefulness are not worth the cumulative cost of a mind operating below its capacity for weeks and months and years. He also wrote about what we would now recognize as the importance of physical activity for cognitive function. He did not have the neuroscience we have today, but he observed, correctly, that people who moved their bodies regularly seemed to think more clearly, manage their emotions more effectively, and sustain their focus for longer periods. He was not prescribing a specific exercise regimen. He was making a more fundamental point. You cannot separate your mental life from your physical one. They are the same life. And treating your body with carelessness is a form of treating your mind with carelessness. This integration, body and mind as one system, is something that a lot of self-improvement advice still manages to get wrong. There are books about the mind that never mention the body. There are fitness programs that never mention the mind. Bennett, writing more than a century ago, already understood that this separation was false and that genuine efficiency required attending to both. Let us now talk about something Bennett addressed with particular care, and something that remains one of the most misunderstood elements of any attempt at self-development, the role of enthusiasm. There is a version of self-improvement that is deeply joyless. It is all discipline and sacrifice and grinding through tasks you hate in order to build some hypothetical future version of yourself that you hope to like better. Bennett rejected this vision entirely. He believed that the secret engine of real mental development was genuine enthusiasm, the kind of enthusiasm that makes you want to keep going not because you have forced yourself to but because the activity itself is intrinsically rewarding. He was not naive about this. He knew that not every task would be immediately thrilling. He knew that learning anything worthwhile involved periods of confusion and frustration and the uncomfortable feeling of not being very good yet. But he believed that if you approached your chosen area of development with the right spirit, if you allowed yourself to be genuinely curious, genuinely playful, genuinely interested in discovery rather than merely in performance, then the enthusiasm would grow rather than diminish over time. This is something that modern psychology has confirmed in detail. The concept of intrinsic motivation, the kind that comes from genuine interest and curiosity rather than external reward or punishment, is far more durable and far more productive than the extrinsic kind. People who learn things because they genuinely want to understand them learn more deeply and retain more than people who learn things because they are afraid of the consequences of not learning them. This seems obvious when you say it out loud. And yet the entire edifice of formal education, and much of the self-help industry, is built on the assumption that fear and obligation are more reliable motivators than genuine interest. Bennett would disagree, and the evidence, by now, is substantially on his side. So one of the practical implications of this is, when you are choosing what to develop in yourself, choose something that actually interests you. Not what you think you should be interested in. Not what sounds impressive at dinner parties. Not what your parents wanted for you or what your culture suggests is valuable. Something that genuinely lights something up in you when you think about it. Because that genuine spark, however small it might seem at first, is the fuel that will carry you through the inevitable difficult periods. And here is the deeper point. You almost certainly already know what that thing is. Most people do. It is often the thing they are slightly embarrassed to admit they care about, because it seems impractical or niche or somehow not serious enough to be worth real time and attention. Bennett's message is, take it seriously. The capacity you develop through genuine, enthusiastic engagement with something you love will serve you in everything else you do, because what you are really developing is not just knowledge of a subject. You are developing the capacity for deep engagement itself, and that capacity is the most transferable skill there is. Let us talk now about what Bennett called the danger of diffusion. This is perhaps one of his most important warnings, and it speaks directly to a problem that has only become more acute since his time. Diffusion is what happens when you spread your mental energy across too many things at once. It is the opposite of the focused, sustained engagement he advocates. And it is, in our current moment, one of the great epidemics of the mind. The person in the grip of diffusion is always starting things and never finishing them. They have a shelf of half-read books, a list of courses they enrolled in but never completed, a dozen projects in various stages of not quite being done. They are constantly attracted to new ideas, new possibilities, new beginnings. And this constant attraction is not laziness. Often these are genuinely curious, genuinely energetic people. The problem is that they have never made the internal commitment that real development requires, the commitment to stay with something past the initial excitement, through the difficult middle, to the other side where genuine competence and genuine understanding lie. Bennett was compassionate about this. He understood why diffusion happens. New beginnings feel good. They carry the energy of possibility, before the reality of difficulty sets in. Every new thing you start carries, for a moment, the promise of the person you hope to become. And so the mind that has not been trained in sustained commitment keeps chasing that feeling of beginning, because the beginning is where the excitement is, and the difficulty is where the excitement is not. But here is what the diffuse mind never gets to experience: the specific, rich satisfaction that comes from having genuinely mastered something. Not mastered in the sense of having done it once or twice, but mastered in the sense of having lived with it long enough that it becomes part of how you see and engage with the world. The person who has stuck with one thing, who has gone through the frustrating middle period and come out the other side, possesses something that the person flitting between beginnings will never have. They possess depth. And depth, Bennett argues, is one of the most undervalued qualities in modern life. Think about the people you most respect and admire, not the ones who are merely impressive from a distance, but the ones whose company genuinely enriches you, whose perspective genuinely shifts how you see things. Are they people of wide, shallow knowledge, or are they people who have gone deep into something, who know it from the inside, who have earned their understanding through sustained engagement? In almost every case, it is the latter. Depth creates real wisdom. Breadth, without depth, creates the appearance of knowledge without the substance of it. This does not mean you should only ever be interested in one thing. Bennett was not advocating for a kind of intellectual monasticism. He read widely, engaged with many ideas, and celebrated intellectual curiosity in all its forms. But he drew an important distinction between curiosity as the entry point to something and curiosity as a substitute for commitment. You can be broadly curious and still choose to go deep in specific areas. The combination of breadth at the surface and depth in a few chosen directions is, in his view, the ideal posture of a well-developed mind. Now, let us talk about something that might seem like a detour but is actually central to everything Bennett was arguing: the question of what we think about when we are not actively thinking about anything in particular. Most people, if they are honest, will admit that the default state of their mind, when not occupied with a specific task, is not particularly pleasant or productive. The mind left to its own devices tends to rehearse anxieties, replay old grievances, wonder about what other people think of them, and generally circle the same small collection of worries and preoccupations that have been circling since approximately adolescence. This is not a moral failing. It is, in some sense, a design feature. The brain evolved to monitor for threats, and in the absence of a real threat, it will manufacture the experience of threat from whatever material is available. But Bennett believed, and this is one of the places where his thinking was most ahead of its time, that the content of a person's idle thoughts was not fixed. It was trainable. The mind that has been filled, over time, with genuinely interesting ideas, with real questions worth pondering, with the accumulated richness of genuine reading and genuine thinking, will default, when left to itself, to a very different quality of inner life than the mind that has been filled primarily with television and gossip and the surface noise of a distracted culture. This sounds elitist when stated baldly, and it is important to be careful here, because Bennett was not saying that some people's inner lives are better than others in some inherent sense. He was saying something much simpler and much more hopeful: that the quality of your inner life, the texture of your own mind when you are alone with it, is something you can influence. You can, through deliberate choices about what you feed your attention, gradually change what your mind reaches for by default. Think about what it would mean to have a mind that, when left alone, reaches naturally for curiosity rather than anxiety, for interesting questions rather than circular worries, for genuine engagement with the world rather than defensive withdrawal from it. This is not a fantasy. It is the natural consequence of years of deliberate attention to what you put into your mind. And here is something beautiful about this: it compounds. The richness of your inner life grows, not linearly, but exponentially. Each genuinely interesting idea you encounter creates new connections. Each connection creates new possibilities for thought. Each possibility opens new doors. The mind that has been building itself in this way for 5 or 10 years is not just 5 or 10 times richer than it was at the start. It is categorically different. It operates in a different register entirely. Bennett wrote about this with genuine excitement, and you can feel it in his prose. He was not a joyless advocate for self-improvement. He loved the life of the mind. He wanted his readers to love it too, not because it was virtuous or impressive, but because it was genuinely, exhilaratingly good. The pleasure of a well-exercised mind encountering a genuinely difficult idea is one of the great, underrated pleasures of human existence. And it is available to anyone who is willing to do the work of preparation. Let us now turn to something practical and specific, the question of how to deal with the very real constraints of a busy life. Bennett was not writing for aristocrats with unlimited leisure time. He was writing for people with jobs, with families, with obligations that could not be set aside. He understood what it meant to be tired at the end of a working day. He understood the genuine appeal of rest, of switching off, of giving the mind a break. And he did not argue against rest. He argued for using even the small pockets of time that exist in every busy life more intentionally. His observation was that most people significantly underestimate how much time they actually have in a day, if they choose to use it deliberately. The 15 minutes on the train. The 20 minutes at lunch that would otherwise go to scrolling. The half hour before bed that typically disappears into the television. He was not suggesting you turn every moment into a grinding self-improvement exercise. He was suggesting that if you identified even 1 or 2 of these pockets and protected them consistently, the accumulation over weeks and months and years would be staggering. Consider this. 15 minutes a day of focused reading is roughly 90 hours a year. 90 hours is enough to read 20 to 30 books, depending on their length and your reading speed. 20 to 30 books a year, read with genuine attention and reflection, would, over a decade, give you a breadth and depth of knowledge that most people simply do not have. Not because those people lack intelligence or interest. Because they never made the small, consistent choice to use 15 minutes a day differently. This is not about being superhuman. It is about being deliberate. It is about recognizing that the small choices, made consistently, are not small at all. They are the architecture of a life. There is another dimension to this practical efficiency that Bennett emphasizes, and it is one that tends to get less attention than the time management piece, the importance of preparation. Specifically, the mental preparation that happens before you sit down to work or to learn. Most people dive directly into a task without any kind of preparatory mental orientation. They open the book without a clear sense of what they are looking for. They sit down to write without having thought through what they want to say. They begin a project without having clarified, even briefly, what success would look like. And then they are surprised when the work feels scattered and unproductive and the results are disappointing. Bennett believed in a brief but genuine period of mental preparation before any significant intellectual activity. Not an elaborate ritual, not a long preamble, just a few moments of asking, what am I doing here? What am I trying to understand, or create, or solve? What do I already know about this, and what am I bringing to it? This simple act of orientation has an enormous effect on the quality of what follows, because it sets the mind moving in a direction before the work begins, rather than asking it to find its direction midstream. This connects to something that modern cognitive science has confirmed, the concept of priming. When you prepare your mind for a task, when you give it a clear target before you begin, it begins working on that target immediately, even before you are consciously aware of it. The famous experience of waking up with the solution to a problem you were stuck on the night before is a version of this. The mind, given a clear problem and then allowed to rest, continues working in the background. Preparation is not just about organizing your thoughts. It is about setting your mind's background processes in motion. Let us also spend some time with something Bennett wrote about that cuts very close to the bone for a lot of people, the relationship between mental efficiency and self-confidence. There is a very specific kind of intellectual insecurity that afflicts people who are intelligent enough to know how much they do not know, but who have not yet done enough of the real work of developing their minds to feel secure in what they do know. This insecurity manifests in many ways. It shows up as a reluctance to voice opinions in conversations, for fear of being wrong. It shows up as a tendency to defer reflexively to authority, even when your own thinking leads you to a different conclusion. It shows up as a vague but persistent feeling that other people are more capable, more knowledgeable, more entitled to their confidence than you are. Bennett's answer to this is not affirmations or the performance of confidence. It is the real thing. The genuine, earned confidence that comes from having done the work. The person who has been reading and thinking and engaging with ideas consistently for years has something that cannot be faked: actual understanding. And actual understanding produces a specific kind of calm certainty that is very different from either arrogance or anxiety. It is the confidence of someone who knows what they know, knows why they know it, and is genuinely comfortable acknowledging what they do not know, because not knowing no longer feels threatening. It feels like an invitation. This is one of the most important things a well-developed mind gives you: the ability to hold uncertainty without being destabilized by it. Intellectually secure people are not people who have all the answers. They are people who are genuinely okay with questions. They can sit with ambiguity without needing to resolve it prematurely into a false certainty. This capacity, more than any specific body of knowledge, is what distinguishes truly capable thinkers from people who are merely learned. And it is worth saying, because Bennett implies this throughout the book even if he does not always say it explicitly, this kind of intellectual security has nothing to do with formal credentials. Nothing. Some of the most intellectually secure people in history had no formal education to speak of. And some of the most intellectually insecure people are those whose entire sense of self is tied to their degrees and their titles, because they have learned to perform intelligence rather than actually develop it. The credential can be a substitute for the work. It can be the thing that allows you to stop developing, because you have proof, on paper, that you are smart enough. Bennett would say that this is one of the great traps of formal education. It can give people the impression that they have arrived when they have, in fact, barely begun. Real development never arrives. That is one of the slightly uncomfortable but ultimately liberating truths at the heart of Bennett's book. There is no finish line. There is no point at which you have become mentally efficient and can therefore relax and coast. The mind either continues to grow or it begins, very slowly, to atrophy. And the choice to keep growing, to keep reading, to keep engaging, to keep questioning, is one you have to make, not once, but over and over again, every day, for the rest of your life. This might sound exhausting. Bennett would say it is actually the opposite. The person who has built genuine mental habits, who reads as naturally as they breathe, who thinks as naturally as they move, who engages with ideas as naturally as they engage with other people, does not experience this as a burden. It is simply how they live. And it is, by most accounts of people who have actually achieved it, a very good way to live. Let us now turn to a topic that Bennett devoted particular care to, and that I find personally fascinating: the question of what to do with disagreement, with ideas that challenge what you already believe. Most people, most of the time, consume only ideas that confirm what they already think. This is not entirely their fault. Confirmation bias is one of the most deeply wired features of the human mind. We are naturally drawn to information that fits our existing mental models and naturally resistant to information that disrupts them. This was probably adaptive at some point in our evolutionary history. But it is a catastrophe for intellectual development. Bennett argued that one of the most valuable things a person could do for their mind was to make a deliberate practice of engaging seriously with ideas they disagreed with. Not to perform open-mindedness, not to indulge in the sentimental notion that all perspectives are equally valid, but genuinely, seriously, charitably engaging with the best version of an argument that runs counter to your existing beliefs. Because only by doing this can you know whether your beliefs are actually sound or merely comfortable. He told the story of a man who had held a particular political view his entire adult life and had never, in all those years, read a single book written by a serious person who disagreed with him. He had read plenty of books that confirmed his view. He had read rebuttals of the opposing view, written by people who agreed with him. But he had never actually sat down with the genuine, thoughtful, well-argued case for the other side. And when Bennett challenged him on this, the man admitted, with some discomfort, that he could not actually be sure whether he believed what he believed because it was right or simply because he had never given himself the opportunity to find out otherwise. This is a form of intellectual cowardice, Bennett says, though he is gentle about it, because it is so common and so human. Most of us are guilty of it to some degree. The beliefs we hold with the greatest certainty are often the ones we have examined the least, because they feel so obvious that examination seems unnecessary. But the beliefs that feel most obvious to us are often precisely the ones most shaped by our particular cultural context, our family background, our emotional investments. They are the ones that most need examination. The practice of reading and genuinely engaging with serious disagreement does something remarkable to the mind. It does not necessarily change your views, though it might. What it does, reliably, is deepen your understanding of your own views, clarify your actual reasons for holding them, and strip away the parts that were based on nothing more than familiarity and comfort. The view that survives this process is stronger and more genuinely your own than the view that was never tested. And the person who engages in this process regularly develops a quality of thought that is simply not available to the person who never does it. Bennett was also clear about something that could be a pitfall here: the difference between engaging with serious disagreement and engaging with mere provocation. Not every challenging idea deserves sustained engagement. There is a difference between a genuine intellectual challenge to your worldview and a clever rhetorical trick designed to unsettle rather than to illuminate. Part of developing a good mind is developing the judgment to tell the difference. And that judgment itself comes from experience, from having read enough serious thought that you begin to recognize the difference between ideas that genuinely open something up and ideas that are merely noisy. Now, there is something else Bennett wrote about that deserves careful attention, because it is the kind of thing that is easy to miss on a first reading. He talked about the role of friendship and intellectual community in mental development, and he made a point that is both obvious in retrospect and genuinely easy to overlook. The people you spend the most time with have an enormous influence on the quality of your mental life. Not in a simple, mechanical way, not that you automatically become a copy of whoever you spend time with. But in the more subtle sense that the conversations you have regularly, the topics that come up naturally in your social circle, the things that are considered interesting or worth discussing, all of these shape what your mind reaches for by default. A person who spends most of their social time in conversations that stay safely on the surface, on entertainment, on gossip, on the comfortable and familiar, will, over time, find that their own mind has accommodated itself to that level. Not because they are incapable of depth, but because depth that is never exercised in conversation atrophies just like any other capacity. Whereas the person who regularly finds themselves in conversations that push them, that introduce ideas they had not considered, that require them to articulate and defend their own thinking, will find that their mind rises to meet those conversations, and is quietly stretched by them. Bennett was not suggesting you ruthlessly cull your social circle and replace your friends with people who are more intellectually stimulating. That would be both difficult and somewhat monstrous. He was making the more practical suggestion that you actively seek out, and invest in, relationships where genuine intellectual exchange is possible. Even one or two such relationships, maintained with real care and regularity, can have a significant effect on the development of your mind. Because the ideas you explore in genuine conversation are processed differently, more deeply, more personally, than ideas encountered only in reading. Conversation makes ideas live in a way that solitary reading alone cannot. There is also something important here about teaching. Bennett observed that one of the fastest ways to genuinely understand something is to try to teach it to someone else. Not in a formal educational sense necessarily, but in the sense of trying to explain something you are learning to a friend or family member who does not already know it. The act of translation, of taking an idea and finding the words that will make it real for another person, forces a depth of understanding that passive reading alone rarely achieves. You very quickly discover, when you try to explain something, exactly which parts of your understanding are genuine and which parts were merely the illusion of understanding, words that felt familiar without actually being grasped. This is a technique that has been validated by modern learning science under the name of the Feynman technique, but Bennett was advocating for it on intuitive grounds long before anyone had named it. The idea is simply this: if you cannot explain something simply and clearly to someone who does not already know it, you do not yet understand it as well as you think you do. And this is not a failure. It is information. It tells you exactly where to focus your attention next. Let us talk now about something that Bennett wrote about with great conviction and that I find one of the most genuinely useful frameworks in the entire book: the idea of mental economy. Mental economy, in Bennett's sense, is the art of deploying your mental energy where it will have the greatest effect, and withdrawing it from where it is being wasted. It is about being deliberate, not just about how you spend your time, but about how you spend your attention and your cognitive resources within that time. One of the great drains on mental economy, he argues, is worry. Not thinking carefully about a problem so that you can solve it, but the circular, non-productive replaying of anxieties that goes nowhere and changes nothing. Worry is mental energy leaving the system without producing any useful output. It is the cognitive equivalent of a car spinning its wheels in mud, a great deal of energy expended, no forward motion. And yet most people allow worry to consume enormous amounts of their mental resources, often without even being fully aware that it is happening. Bennett's prescription for worry is not the elimination of thinking about problems. He was too realistic for that. It is the development of what he calls the power of mental direction, the ability to consciously redirect your attention when you notice it has been captured by unproductive circular thinking. This is not easy. It is, in fact, one of the more demanding mental skills there is. But it is trainable, and the person who develops even a modest degree of this skill gains back an enormous amount of mental resources that can be redirected toward genuinely productive thought. Modern neuroscience and psychology have a great deal to say about this under headings like metacognition and attentional control. But Bennett, writing from observation and lived experience rather than laboratory research, got the essential point exactly right. The ability to notice where your attention is, and to consciously redirect it, is a skill. It is learnable, and it has an outsized effect on the quality of your intellectual life. There is a corollary to this that Bennett also addresses: the importance of knowing when to stop. The mind is not well served by relentless, unbroken effort. There is a natural rhythm to productive thinking, peaks of engagement followed by necessary periods of rest and integration. The person who insists on grinding through a task long past the point of genuine engagement is not being productive. They are producing lower quality work with greater effort, and simultaneously making it harder for their mind to recover for the next session. The willingness to stop at the right moment, to give the mind the rest it needs, is itself a form of efficiency. It is recognizing that rest is not the absence of work. It is part of the cycle that makes good work possible. Bennett had a practice he describes with quiet enthusiasm. He would end each work session while he still had energy, before he was depleted, specifically so that he would come back to the work the next day with genuine eagerness rather than dread. This might seem counterintuitive. Many people push until they are utterly exhausted and then wonder why they feel so resistant to beginning again the next day. The resistance is the predictable result of a mind that has learned to associate the work with depletion. Ending while you still have energy teaches your mind a different association. The work is something engaging and rewarding, something you are always coming back to with momentum rather than something you are crawling toward in exhaustion. Now, let us spend a little time with something that might be the most personal part of Bennett's book, his discussion of what he calls the art of living. For all his emphasis on efficiency and method and deliberate development, Bennett never lost sight of the deeper purpose behind all of it. The goal was not to produce a more efficient worker or a more impressive intellectual. The goal was to produce a richer human being, someone who was more fully alive to the world, more capable of genuine experience, more equipped to find real meaning in their existence. He wrote with some sadness about people who had achieved external success, who had all the markers that their culture told them would make them happy, and who were, nonetheless, living in a kind of inner poverty. Not because they lacked things. Because they had never developed the internal richness that turns things into experience. They had the novels on their shelves but had never learned to read in a way that made those novels actually live. They had the music in their lives but had never developed the listening that would allow it to actually move them. They had the years but had never developed the attention that would allow them to actually inhabit them. This is what he meant by the art of living, the cultivation of the capacity to actually be present in your own existence. To not just move through your days but to actually experience them. And this capacity, he argues, is not given. It is developed. It is the natural result of a mind that has been trained in attention, in genuine engagement, in the willingness to go beneath the surface of things. He wrote about the pleasures available to a well-developed mind with a kind of infectious delight. The pleasure of following an argument to its conclusion. The pleasure of encountering an idea that reframes everything you thought you knew about a subject. The pleasure of reading something that articulates with perfect clarity a feeling you have had but never been able to name. The pleasure of a conversation so good that you are still thinking about it 3 days later. These pleasures are not available to the untrained mind, not because the untrained mind is incapable of them in some fundamental sense, but because it has not yet built the capacity to recognize and receive them. There is a kind of beauty that is only visible to those who have learned to look for it. Not an elitist beauty, not the beauty of expensive or exclusive things, but the beauty of ideas, of patterns, of the sudden recognition that something apparently simple conceals enormous depth. This beauty is everywhere, available to anyone who develops the ability to see it. And the path to that ability runs directly through the practices Bennett describes: sustained attention, genuine curiosity, deliberate engagement, and the patient willingness to do the work of really understanding something rather than merely passing over it. Let us now talk about the practical architecture of mental development, because Bennett was nothing if not practical, and he understood that inspiration without method is just a pleasant feeling that fades. His advice for anyone who wants to genuinely begin was this: start with one thing. Not a program, not a comprehensive self-improvement plan. One thing. Choose one area of your life, your mind, your character that you genuinely want to develop. Make it specific. Not, I want to be smarter, but, I want to understand economics well enough to actually think about the financial choices I make. Or, I want to read the history of the civilization one live in because I genuinely know almost nothing about it. Or, I want to improve my ability to write clearly because I use language every day and I know I am not using it as well as I could be. Then build one habit around that one thing. Not a grand gesture. A small, specific, repeatable practice. 10 minutes every morning. A book by the bed that you read. Instead of scrolling before sleep. A notebook you carry to capture the ideas that come to you during the day. One small, specific, sustainable habit. And protect it. Not aggressively, not neurotically, but with the quiet conviction that this time belongs to your own development and matters enough to defend from the casual erosion that will otherwise consume it. Then do not assess results too quickly. The development of the mind is not visible in the short term. It is like gardening. You plant seeds, you water them, and for a long time nothing seems to happen. And then, slowly, something does. And then it grows faster. And then one day you look back and realize that the landscape of your inner life is genuinely, substantially different from what it was when you began. But you will not see this if you are checking every week for signs of progress. You have to trust the process for long enough that the process can actually work. Bennett was honest about the fact that this required a kind of faith. Not religious faith, but the practical faith that says, I believe, based on the evidence of others who have done this, that if I put in the work consistently over time, the results will come. This faith is not blind. It is based on the observable fact that people who do develop their minds consistently do become richer, more capable, more interesting versions of themselves. But it requires a time horizon that our culture of instant gratification tends to work against. You have to be willing to invest without immediate return. You have to be comfortable with a form of compound interest that does not pay out visibly until years down the road. There is something else worth naming here, which Bennett touches on: the role of failure and frustration in genuine development. At some point in any serious attempt to develop your mind, you will hit a wall. You will read something you cannot follow. You will try to understand something and fail. You will write something that is much worse than you wanted it to be. You will have a conversation where you feel inarticulate and outclassed. These moments are not evidence that you are not capable. They are evidence that you are reaching. And reaching is the only way forward. The person who never experiences intellectual frustration is the person who is never challenging themselves. They are staying comfortably within the bounds of what they can already do, and while that might feel safe, it is also, in Bennett's terms, a form of stagnation. The discomfort of not yet understanding something is the precise sensation of a mind at its growing edge. Learn to recognize it as a good sign rather than a bad one. There is a man I want to tell you about, because his story captures something essential about what Bennett was describing. He was a postal worker in the English Midlands in the early 20th century. Ordinary job, modest income, no particular claim to distinction. But he had, from the time he was a young man, maintained one unbreakable habit. Every evening, for 1 hour, he read. Not newspapers, not popular fiction, though he enjoyed both, but one serious book at a time, worked through slowly and carefully, with a small notebook for questions and observations. He did this for 40 years. 40 years of 1 hour a night, 5 or 6 nights a week. When he died, his family found not just thousands of books but dozens of notebooks, filled with the patient, careful thinking of a man who had spent 4 decades building his mind. His grandchildren, reading those notebooks, found inside them the evidence of a fully formed, deeply interesting, genuinely wise person. Not a famous person, not a publicly celebrated person, just a man who had, in Bennett's exact sense, used what he had, fully and consistently. And become, in the process, more than what ordinary circumstances would have predicted. This is what Bennett is really offering. Not fame, not fortune, not the performance of intelligence. Something quieter and better. The genuine richness of a mind that has been tended to, carefully and patiently, for a long time. The kind of richness that makes your own company interesting to you. The kind that means you are never bored, never without resources, never without the ability to find something genuinely worth thinking about. The kind that means, as you get older and the world changes around you, you have an internal life stable and rich enough to weather those changes without being flattened by them. Let us now visit something that runs through the whole book but is easy to miss because Bennett does not always state it directly, his view on the relationship between mental efficiency and ethical character. Bennett believed that the development of the mind and the development of character were not separate projects. He believed, with some conviction, that a genuinely well-developed mind would naturally tend toward greater honesty, greater compassion, and greater fairness. Not because being smart makes you good, history provides ample counter-examples to that idea, but because the specific qualities of mind he was advocating, the willingness to see clearly, to examine your own assumptions, to engage seriously with perspectives different from your own, to resist the comfort of easy certainty, these qualities, applied to how you treat other people, tend to produce better behavior. The person who has learned to examine their own assumptions about abstract ideas will, if they are consistent, also learn to examine their assumptions about other people. The person who has practiced taking seriously ideas that challenge them will, if they are consistent, also take seriously the perspectives and experiences of people very different from themselves. The skills are transferable, and the person who develops them in one domain and then fails to apply them in another is being inconsistent in a way that a genuinely well-developed mind should be able to notice. This does not mean, again, that intellectual development is a guarantee of virtue. But it does mean that the habits of mind Bennett describes, if genuinely internalized and applied broadly, tend to make people somewhat kinder, somewhat fairer, somewhat more capable of genuine empathy. Because empathy is, at its core, an act of imagination, the ability to genuinely inhabit another person's perspective, to really understand what the world looks like from inside their experience. And imagination of this quality is something that the developed mind is much better equipped for than the undeveloped one. There is a moment, partway through mental efficiency, where Bennett describes what it feels like to begin to experience the benefits of genuine mental development. He writes with an almost shy enthusiasm about the feeling of picking up a book that would have been inaccessible to you 2 years ago and finding that it now makes sense, that you can follow the argument, that you have the context and the vocabulary and the intellectual foundation to actually receive what is being offered. He writes about the pleasure of a conversation in which you realize, midstream, that you have more to contribute than you expected, that the thinking you have been doing quietly and consistently has actually prepared you for exactly this moment. He writes about the experience of sitting alone with a difficult problem and finding, to your own mild surprise, that your mind is more equal to it than you feared. These are not dramatic moments. They do not look like anything from the outside, but they are, to the person experiencing them, among the most quietly satisfying experiences a human being can have. They are the specific pleasure of having invested in yourself and finding that the investment has paid off. And they accumulate. Each small experience of this kind reinforces the habit that produced it, makes the next step of development a little easier, a little more natural, a little more clearly worth the continued effort. And here is something about the near end of this journey through Bennett's ideas that feels important to name. None of this requires extraordinary circumstances. None of it requires exceptional talent. None of it requires a particular background or a particular level of formal education or a particular amount of money or a particular kind of life. It requires 2 things. The first is the decision, the real decision, not the wish but the genuine commitment, to take your own mind seriously. The second is the willingness to act on that decision with the small, consistent, daily practices that turn commitment into reality. Bennett's book was not written for geniuses. It was written for ordinary people, people like the postal worker I mentioned, people like the factory worker's daughter who built her extraordinary inner life in the spaces between ordinary responsibilities. It was written in the conviction that the ordinary person, given the right approach and the genuine will to use it, could develop a mind that would astonish even them. He ends mental efficiency not with a call to greatness in the way the world usually measures greatness, not with the promise of fame or wealth or public recognition. He ends it with something more intimate. The suggestion that the greatest achievement available to any person is the achievement of becoming more fully themselves, of developing the particular configuration of intelligence and curiosity and understanding and character that is uniquely theirs, and of living, as a result, with a richness and depth and genuine engagement that makes life, for all its difficulty, genuinely worth the living. That is not a small promise. In fact, quietly, it is one of the largest ones available to any of us. Let us bring this all together now, because the arc of everything Bennett was arguing leads somewhere specific, and it is worth arriving there with care. He began with the observation that most people are not using their minds to anything like their potential. Not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack method, habit, and the particular form of respect for their own minds that would lead them to invest in developing those minds. He argued that time is available, that the pockets of free time that exist in even the busiest life are sufficient, if used deliberately, to build something significant. He argued that the key practices are sustained attention, genuine curiosity, deliberate engagement with ideas, the willingness to challenge your own assumptions, the development of real depth in a few chosen areas alongside broad engagement with many, and the patient cultivation of the mental habits that make all of this possible without requiring constant willpower. He argued that the body and the mind are one system, and that neglecting one necessarily costs the other. He argued that the quality of attention matters infinitely more than the quantity of time, and that learning to focus genuinely is itself the most important skill to develop. He argued that the content of your inner life is trainable, that the texture of your own mind when you are alone with it is something you can influence through the choices you make about what to feed your attention. He argued that confidence comes from genuine development, not from the performance of confidence, and that the intellectual security of someone who has done the work is categorically different from the insecurity of someone who has merely accumulated credentials. He argued that engagement with serious disagreement is essential to genuine understanding, and that the belief you have never tested is a belief you cannot really claim as your own. He argued, finally, that all of this serves something beyond productivity, beyond success in the conventional sense. It serves the art of living, the capacity to actually inhabit your own existence, to be present in your own life, to find in the ordinary materials of an ordinary day the richness and depth that make it genuinely worth living. These ideas have not aged. If anything, in a world of infinite distraction and infinite noise, where the forces working against sustained attention and genuine depth are more powerful than anything Bennett could have imagined, they are more urgent than they have ever been. The choice to develop your mind, to take it seriously, to invest in it consistently, is a form of resistance against a culture that profits from keeping you distracted and shallow. It is an act of genuine self-respect, and its rewards are not primarily external. They are the internal rewards of a life lived with more presence, more engagement, and more genuine richness than the drift of ordinary habit would ever have produced. You picked up this book, in whatever form you encountered it, because something in you recognized that you have more to offer yourself than your current habits are allowing. Bennett's message is, you are right. And here is what to do about it. Begin. Begin with one thing, one habit, one small protected pocket of time, one genuine commitment to use some part of your day for the deliberate development of your mind. Not perfectly, not comprehensively, just begin. And then, the day after that, begin again. And the day after that. And keep going, through the days when it feels rewarding and through the days when it does not, through the days when you can feel yourself growing and through the days when the growth is invisible. Keep going because you know, from everything Bennett observed and everything that the evidence of hundreds of years of human self-development confirms, that the process is reliable. If you put in the work consistently over time, the results will come. They will come quietly at first. You will not wake up one morning transformed. But one day you will find yourself in a conversation and realize you have something genuinely worth saying. One day you will pick up a book that would have been impossible 2 years ago and find it accessible and fascinating. One day you will face a difficult problem and find your own mind more resourceful than you expected. One day you will sit alone in silence and discover that the silence is not uncomfortable, that your own company is genuinely enough, that the richness of your inner life has become real. These moments are the payoff. Not the only payoff, but the most satisfying one. Because they are the evidence of something that is genuinely, inarguably yours. No one gave it to you. No one can take it from you. You built it, in the small hours and the quiet margins of an ordinary life, by choosing, again and again, to take your own mind seriously. That is the essential gift of mental efficiency. Not a system, not a formula, an invitation, extended with warmth and conviction, to become more fully the person you already have the capacity to be. If this summary moved something in you, if it made you want to pick up the actual book and spend time with Bennett's own words, then it has done its job. And if it has simply given you one idea, one practice, one small shift in how you think about your own mental life, then it has given you something real. Please like and subscribe to Audiobook Library. It truly helps this channel grow and allows us to bring more summaries and audiobook content to people who need it. Every like, every subscription, every share is a real contribution to something that, hopefully, is adding some genuine value to your life and the lives of others. And please, do take a moment to explore the other videos in our library. There are many more authors, many more ideas, many more books waiting to share their best with you. Every one of them was written by someone who had learned to take their own mind seriously and wanted to offer you the fruit of that serious engagement. Every one of them is an invitation, like this one, to grow. Bennett would have approved, I think. He believed that ideas should circulate, that the best thinking should find its way to the people who need it most, regardless of the form that journey takes. He believed in the democratization of intellectual life, in the idea that the riches of human thought belong to anyone willing to do the work of receiving them. Go do the work. Begin today. Begin with whatever is available to you, in whatever time you can protect. Begin imperfectly and begin anyway. Your mind is waiting for you to take it seriously, and when you do, you will find it far more capable, far more interesting, and far more rewarding to live in than you ever imagined. That is everything, and it is enough. But before we truly close, there are things that deserve a longer look. Because Bennett's book, for all its clarity, contains layers that reveal themselves slowly, and there is still rich territory to cover if we want to do justice to the full scope of what he was offering. So let us go back, and go deeper, into several of the ideas we have touched on, because each one contains more than we have yet drawn out. Let us start with attention, because everything else in the book ultimately depends on it, and Bennett's understanding of attention is subtle enough that a brief mention does not fully honor it. Attention, for Bennett, was not merely the act of looking at something. It was the act of genuinely receiving it. There is a difference, and it is enormous. You can look at a painting for an hour and receive nothing, if your mind is somewhere else while your eyes move across the canvas. You can sit in a lecture for 90 minutes and leave knowing nothing, if the surface of your mind was present but the depth of it was occupied elsewhere. Conversely, you can spend 5 minutes with a single paragraph and emerge from those 5 minutes fundamentally changed, if your attention was genuinely engaged, genuinely present, genuinely receptive. This distinction between surface attention and genuine attention is one of the most important things Bennett asks his readers to understand. And it is one that has become, if anything, more important in the decades since he wrote, because the training that most people receive from their media environment is training in surface attention. The scroll, the skim, the rapid movement from one stimulus to the next without any of them being truly received. This kind of engagement is not entirely without value. There is a time for skimming, a time for rapid intake of information. But it is a catastrophic default, if it becomes the only mode your mind knows. The cultivation of genuine, deep attention requires practice. Not because we are fundamentally incapable of it. Human beings were reading long texts with careful attention for centuries before the smartphone, but because it is a capacity that, like any other, atrophies without exercise. The person who spends 10 years reading primarily in short, fragmented bursts will find, at the end of those 10 years, that sustained reading has become genuinely difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. The neural pathways for deep attention need to be maintained, just like the muscles of the body. Bennett's prescription is beautifully simple. Choose something worth your full attention. Give it your full attention. Do this every day. That is it. The subject matters less than the practice. The duration, especially at first, matters less than the quality. 20 minutes of complete, undivided engagement with a serious text will do more for the development of your attentional capacity than 3 hours of distracted, half-present reading. And as the capacity grows, as it will grow if you feed it consistently, longer and deeper engagement becomes possible and, eventually, natural. He wrote about a particular quality of mind that he observed in the people he most admired, a kind of settled presence. When they were with you, they were genuinely with you. When they were reading, they were genuinely reading. When they were thinking, they were genuinely thinking. There was no sense of the mind sliding away, reaching for the next thing before the current thing had been fully received. This presence, this capacity to be fully in the moment of engagement, was not, he argued, a personality trait they were born with. It was a habit they had built, and it was available to anyone willing to build it. There is a story from classical antiquity that Bennett loved to reference in spirit if not always by name. The story of Archimedes, who was so completely absorbed in a geometric problem, so fully present with the question his mind was working on, that he failed to notice a Roman soldier standing over him, failed to respond to commands, failed to register the danger he was in. He was killed for his inattention to the soldier. But his death was also, in a peculiar way, a testament to the extraordinary depth of engagement his mind was capable of. He had given himself so completely to the problem that nothing else existed. Now, Bennett was not advocating for the kind of absorption that gets you killed. But he was genuinely admiring of the quality of mind that Archimedes displayed, a mind so trained in focus that it could go all the way down into something, all the way to the bottom of it, without being pulled back to the surface by every passing distraction. That kind of focus produces extraordinary results. And it is, at its root, the same quality, the same trained capacity, that the rest of us are working toward in our smaller daily practices. The difference is one of degree, not of kind. What does it feel like to genuinely develop this capacity? Bennett describes it in a way that is worth sitting with. He says that the person who has genuinely developed their attentional capacity begins to notice things they did not notice before. Not supernatural things, ordinary things, the texture of an argument, the rhythm of a sentence, the implicit assumption buried in the fourth line of an apparently simple paragraph, the way a particular piece of music modulates in a way that creates a specific emotional effect. These things were always there. They were just previously invisible, because the attention was not developed enough to see them. This is one of the great, underappreciated pleasures of intellectual development. The world gets richer. Not because the world changes. Because you change. The same book you read at 20 is a different book at 40, not because the words have changed but because you have more to bring to them. The music you loved at 20 is different music at 40, because you can hear more of it now. Experience, genuinely processed and genuinely learned from, makes the world more interesting. And the world more interesting means a life more worth living. Let us now spend some time with the question of will and motivation, because this is where many people get stuck, and Bennett had a great deal to say about it that is both realistic and encouraging. The conventional model of motivation says that you wait until you feel motivated, and then you act. This model is, Bennett would say, almost entirely backwards. It treats motivation as something that arrives from outside, a gift that either comes or does not, rather than something you generate through action. The truth, which anyone who has ever developed any serious habit already knows intuitively, is that motivation follows action far more often than it precedes it. You rarely feel like beginning. You begin anyway, and somewhere in the beginning, the motivation catches up. This is not to say that you should grind through activities you fundamentally dislike and expect enthusiasm to appear. Bennett was not advocating for self-torture. He was making the more nuanced point that the beginning of any worthwhile habit is typically the hardest part, not because the habit itself is unpleasant but because you have not yet built up enough investment in it to feel the pull. The person who has been reading seriously for 2 years feels genuinely pulled toward their reading. They do not need to manufacture the motivation each day. The habit has developed its own gravitational field. But at the start, before the habit has developed that field, you have to provide the initial energy through will rather than through feeling. And here, Bennett makes a practical distinction that I find genuinely useful. He distinguishes between will in the grand, dramatic sense, the kind that requires enormous effort and produces enormous strain, and what he calls the quiet resolve of a made-up mind. Grand dramatic willpower is exhausting. It burns hot and burns out quickly. The quiet resolve of a made-up mind is something different. The calm, matter-of-fact decision that this is what you do now, in the same way that brushing your teeth is what you do now, without drama, without negotiation, without the daily re-examination of whether it is worth it. It is simply done. And this is the goal of habit formation, to move a behavior from the domain of will to the domain of the automatic, so that it requires no more decision-making energy than any other basic daily routine. This is why Bennett places such emphasis on starting small. Not because small is the goal. Because small is the pathway. The grand gesture, the comprehensive new routine, the total life overhaul, these things almost always fail because they require sustained dramatic willpower that no one has in unlimited supply. But the small, specific, sustainable habit, the 10 minutes in the morning, the page before sleep, the weekly reflection in a notebook, this kind of habit can become automatic. And automatic habits compound in ways that no amount of sporadic grand effort ever could. Think about it this way. An hour a week of genuine, focused mental development, maintained consistently for 10 years, is 520 hours. 520 hours of genuine, focused engagement with ideas. That is an extraordinary amount of intellectual work. And it is achievable by almost anyone, because 1 hour a week is not heroic. It does not require unusual discipline or unusual sacrifice. It requires only the quiet resolve of a mind that has decided this matters. And here is the key question: does it matter? Bennett's answer is yes, with a conviction that comes from having observed the results in his own life and in the lives of people around him. The person who has invested 500 hours of genuine intellectual engagement in 10 years is not the same person they were at the start. They cannot be. The mind that has genuinely wrestled with 500 hours worth of serious ideas is richer, more flexible, more capable, and more interesting to itself than the mind that spent those same hours in the comfortable but ultimately barren pastures of pure entertainment and distraction. This is not a moral judgment. It is an observation. Entertainment has its place. Genuine rest has its place. The pleasures of unchallenging leisure have their place in a full life. Bennett never argued otherwise. His argument was simply about proportion. About whether the mix, in your particular life, is currently serving the person you want to be in the life you want to live. And for most people, he believed, the mix was out of balance. The passive, consumptive, unstimulating activities were eating up far too much of the available time and attention, not because people preferred it that way, but because they had never been given the tools to choose differently. Let us now look at one of the most practically grounded sections of the book, Bennett's advice on the specific challenges of intellectual development for people in particular circumstances. He wrote for people who were tired at the end of their working day. He knew, from his own experience and from observation of the people around him, that the 7 o'clock version of you is not the 8 in the morning version of you. That the energy available for genuine mental effort in the evening is different in quality and quantity from the energy available in the fresh hours of the morning. His advice on this was nuanced. He did not pretend that tired was the same as rested. He acknowledged that there were forms of mental work better suited to tired hours than others. Reading, for instance, is generally more accessible than writing, late in the day. Reviewing and consolidating what you already know is generally more accessible than learning something genuinely new. Taking notes on something you have been thinking about during the day is generally more accessible than starting from scratch with a complex new problem. He was advocating for a kind of intelligent self-management, matching the type of mental work you ask of yourself to the resources actually available at that time of day. This is different from the advice to always do your most demanding work in the morning, which is the conventional wisdom and which is correct as far as it goes. But it misses the point that even the tired hours are not useless. They are simply suited to different kinds of work. And the person who knows this, who has thought deliberately about what can be done when and structures their development accordingly, will accomplish far more over time than the person who only makes use of their peak hours and abandons the rest. There is also something Bennett wrote about that is almost never discussed in summaries of his work, perhaps because it seems too simple to be worth mentioning, but which I think is actually one of his most important practical observations: the importance of physically writing things down. In an age before recording devices, before the ability to store and retrieve information electronically, the notebook was the external memory of the thinking mind. Bennett was a passionate advocate for it, not as a diary, necessarily, not as a record of feelings and events, though those things have their value, but as a workspace for thinking. A place to write down ideas while they are fresh. A place to work through problems in writing because writing forces a clarity of thought that merely thinking does not require. A place to keep the connections you make between things you have read, so that those connections can be revisited and built upon rather than simply forgotten, as they almost certainly will be if they are not written down. The research on this is now quite clear. Writing things down significantly improves both comprehension and retention. The act of translating an idea into your own words in writing forces a level of processing that passive reading does not. You cannot write something down accurately if you do not actually understand it. The writing reveals, immediately and honestly, the gaps in your understanding, which you can then return to fill. And the written record gives you something genuinely valuable, a cumulative document of your own thinking over time, a resource you can return to, build upon, and use. Bennett's own notebooks were legendary among his literary friends. He kept detailed records of observations about people, places, and situations. He worked through the arguments of books he was reading in his own words. He made lists of questions he wanted to pursue. He connected ideas from different sources in ways that generated new insight. He used the physical act of writing as a tool for thinking, not just for recording. And his work was richer for it in ways that were clear to anyone who read it. The modern equivalent of the notebook might be a notes application on your phone, or a word processing document on your computer, or an old-fashioned paper notebook carried in your pocket. The medium matters less than the practice. What matters is the habit of capturing ideas in writing, of working through thoughts on paper or screen rather than only in the head, of creating the external record that the unreliable human memory cannot be trusted to maintain. If you take nothing else from this summary, take this: keep a notebook. Use it every day, not necessarily for long, not necessarily with great formality. Just write down what you read, what it made you think, the questions it raised, the connections it suggested. Do this for a year, and at the end of that year, read back through what you have written. You will find something remarkable. Evidence of a mind at work, evidence of your own thinking developing over time, evidence that the process is producing something real. Now let us talk about something Bennett approached with particular delicacy: the relationship between education and genuine learning. Bennett had deep respect for the idea of education and deep ambivalence about many of its actual implementations. He had observed, with some sadness, that the formal education system of his time, and he would have said the same about ours, was often better at producing the performance of learning than at producing actual learning. It was good at producing people who could answer questions correctly on a test and much less good at producing people who could actually think, who could engage with genuinely novel problems, who could apply what they had nominally learned to the messy, unpredictable situations of real life. This was not, he was careful to say, an indictment of learning or of teachers, many of whom he admired enormously. It was an observation about systems. Systems, by their nature, tend to measure what can be easily measured and ignore what cannot. Genuine intellectual development is hard to measure. The capacity for creative thought, for genuine insight, for the kind of deep understanding that transfers across domains and situations, none of this shows up cleanly in a test. What shows up in tests is the ability to perform specific tasks under specific conditions. And while this ability has its value, it is not the same thing as genuine mental development, and it should not be mistaken for it. This means that formal education, whatever its other virtues, is not sufficient. It is a starting point, sometimes a good one, but it cannot be the whole of your intellectual life if you want that life to be genuinely rich. The degree, the certificate, the credential, these are not the goal. They are, at best, evidence that you have passed through certain formal processes. What you actually carry away in your mind is your own responsibility. And that responsibility does not end on graduation day. It continues, as long as you want to continue growing, for the rest of your life. This is perhaps Bennett's most uncomfortable observation for those who have organized their sense of intellectual identity around their educational credentials. The degree is not the achievement. The continuing development is the achievement. And it is available, in equal measure, to the person who has the degree and the person who does not. The diploma is not the beginning or the end of anything except the formal process. What you do with your mind afterward is entirely, completely, your own business. There is liberation in this, for both groups. For those without formal credentials, it is the liberation of recognizing that the game is not over, that the doors that appeared to close have not actually closed, that the development of a genuine mind is a process that education can facilitate but that it does not control. For those with formal credentials, it is the liberation of recognizing that what you have is a beginning, not an arrival, and that the permission you needed to keep growing was always yours to give yourself. Now let us also look at something Bennett wrote about that touches directly on the creative life, because he was, himself, a novelist and an artist, and he brought to his ideas about mental development a sensibility that was not purely practical but genuinely aesthetic. He believed that the development of the mind was not separate from the development of the creative faculty. In fact, he believed they were deeply intertwined. The capacity for genuine creative work, whether in writing, in music, in visual art, in the design of things or systems or ideas, this capacity requires precisely the same underlying qualities that general mental development requires: sustained attention, genuine curiosity, the ability to hold complexity without rushing to simplify it, the patience to stay with something until it reveals itself fully. And conversely, creative practice develops the general qualities of mind in ways that purely analytical engagement cannot. The person who writes, who paints, who makes music, who engages in any form of genuine creative work, is training aspects of their mind that purely receptive activities, like reading and listening, cannot fully reach. They are learning to generate rather than merely receive. They are learning to make decisions under uncertainty, to trust their own judgment, to put something of themselves into the world and be willing to be seen in it. These are not trivial capacities. They are some of the most important ones a human being can develop. Bennett was suspicious of the common belief, especially prevalent in his time but still present in ours, that creativity is a special gift that some people have and others do not. He believed that everyone had creative capacity, in the broad sense, the capacity to engage with problems and materials and ideas in ways that produced something new rather than merely reproducing something existing. He believed that this capacity, like attention, like focus, like the quality of intellectual engagement, was trainable. It responded to practice. It grew when exercised and shrank when ignored. This is one of the reasons he advocated so strongly for the importance of active, generative engagement with what you learn, rather than purely passive reception. Write about what you read. Draw connections. Ask questions. Formulate your own responses. Disagree when you disagree and articulate why. This kind of active engagement is not just good for retention, though it is good for retention. It is practice in the generative mode of mind, the mode that creates rather than merely receives. And the more time you spend in that mode, the more naturally it comes. Let us now talk about something that runs under the surface of everything else Bennett wrote, something he never quite states directly but that is present on every page: his belief in the dignity of the ordinary life. There is a strain of self-improvement culture, ancient and modern, that is implicitly dismissive of ordinary existence. It is always pointing somewhere else, some higher level, some more exceptional version of life, that the ordinary life is merely preparation for a fall from. It treats the ordinary as a problem to be solved rather than a reality to be engaged with fully. Bennett had no patience for this. He was, himself, a deeply ordinary person in many ways, the son of a provincial solicitor, raised in the 5 towns he wrote about with such affection, embedded in the textures and rhythms of working and middle-class English life. He did not want to escape this life. He wanted to be fully present in it, to find in it the richness that a developed mind could locate in any life, regardless of its surface features. His invitation to his readers was not to become extraordinary. It was to be fully and richly ordinary. To live the life they were actually living, with all its limitations and compromises and unglamorous dailiness, but to live it with a depth of engagement and a quality of awareness that would transform it from something merely endured into something genuinely inhabited. This is a quiet radicalism. It does not ask you to leave your life. It asks you to go deeper into it. And it promises, with the quiet confidence of someone who has actually done it, that deeper is richer. That the ordinary life, lived with genuine attention and genuine engagement, is not a lesser life. It is, in fact, where the fullest human experience is available. Think about this the next time you feel the pull of elsewhere, the restless sense that your real life is happening somewhere other than where you are, that the version of you that really matters is not the one in this moment but some future, better, more impressive version that will appear once the circumstances are right. Bennett would say, no. This is your life. These are your hours. The person you are right now, in these circumstances, with these resources, is the person who gets to decide what to do with what they have. And the decision to go deeper, to engage more fully, to take your own mind more seriously, is available to you right now, not someday. Now, the culture of comparison is something Bennett would have recognized immediately, though his version was the comparison enabled by newspapers and novels and the social observation of a sharply class-conscious society, rather than the comparison enabled by social media and the curated display of other people's lives. In every era, there are mechanisms that encourage people to measure themselves against others and to find themselves wanting. And in every era, the effect of this comparison, if not carefully managed, is the same, a chronic sense of inadequacy that undermines the very confidence and enthusiasm that genuine development requires. Bennett's response to this was to redirect attention firmly and repeatedly back to the only comparison that actually matters, not between yourself and other people, but between yourself and what you know you are capable of. Not between your current achievements and someone else's, but between where you are and where your own genuine potential could take you. This is not a comfortable standard, in some ways it is a more demanding one, but it is a more honest one, and it is the only one that actually produces growth. Because here is the thing about comparing yourself to other people, it is almost always unfair in one direction or another. You are comparing your inside, with all its complexity and context and difficulty, to their outside, their achievements, their visible successes. You do not see the thousands of hours they put in before you arrived. You do not see the failures they endured. You do not see the particular configuration of circumstances that made their path available to them. You see the result and compare it to your beginning, which is not a useful comparison. It is an emotionally damaging one. Whereas the comparison to your own potential is always honest, always fair, always productive. You know what you are capable of. You know when you are giving it fully and when you are holding back. You know the difference between the days you are genuinely trying and the days you are going through the motions. And that knowledge, that honest self-assessment, is the only compass worth following. Bennett wrote about self-knowledge with great affection. He thought it was one of the most genuinely difficult and most genuinely valuable things a person could pursue. Not the kind of self-knowledge that is really just self-indulgence, the endless navel-gazing that produces sensitivity without insight. But the kind that is honest, that sees both your genuine strengths and your genuine limitations clearly, without either inflation or deflation, and that uses what it sees to navigate toward genuine development rather than comfortable self-deception. The development of accurate self-knowledge, he believed, was itself a product of the practices he was advocating. The person who has been thinking carefully and honestly, reading widely and critically, engaging genuinely with ideas and with other people's perspectives, will, over time, develop a clearer and more accurate picture of themselves than the person who has been drifting. Not because the practices are designed to produce self-knowledge, but because honest engagement with the world, honest processing of what you encounter, inevitably turns some of that honesty back on yourself. Let us now talk about what happens when things go wrong, when the habit breaks down, when life intervenes, when you miss a week or a month or even a year and feel that the thread has been lost. Because this will happen. It happens to everyone who has ever seriously committed to any form of long-term development. Life does not hold still while you build your habits. It intrudes, it demands, it disrupts, and then, after the disruption, there is the particular dread of returning to something you have abandoned, the fear that whatever you built has been lost, that you are starting again from zero, that the interruption has undone everything. Bennett's counsel here is firm and compassionate in equal measure. You are not starting from zero. The mind does not lose its development the way a muscle loses its strength after weeks of inactivity, though even muscles do not lose everything. The habits of thought you have developed, the quality of attention you have cultivated, the depth of engagement you have practiced, these things are resident in your mind. They may be slightly rusty. They may need a few sessions to get back to where they were. But they are there. They do not evaporate. What is required, when you return after an interruption, is not the dramatic recommitment, the grand gesture, the comprehensive new plan. What is required is the quiet, undramatic act of picking up where you left off, as calmly and matter-of-factly as possible, without self-flagellation and without excessive ceremony. Just begin again. The fact of beginning again, without making a drama of the return, is itself a practice of exactly the kind of calm resolve that Bennett was advocating from the beginning. Many people, perhaps most, allow the interruption to become the end. They miss a week, and the guilt of missing makes them avoid the activity, and the avoidance becomes familiar, and the familiar becomes the new normal. Bennett's message is, do not let the interruption be the end. Let it be an interruption. Let it be a parenthesis, not a period. Return without ceremony. Continue. The return is an act of intelligence, not of weakness. Now, as we move toward the close of this long, rich exploration of what Bennett was offering, I want to spend some time with what might be the most personal and the most moving part of his vision, his account of what genuine mental development does to your relationship with time. Most people, Bennett observed, have a complicated relationship with time. They feel simultaneously that there is never enough of it and that they are somehow wasting what there is. They feel rushed and aimless at the same time. They are always either behind, running to catch up to something, or adrift, without the clear direction that would give their hours meaning. And this uncomfortable relationship with time is, in his view, one of the principal sources of the low-grade unhappiness that characterizes so many ordinary lives. The person who has genuinely developed their mind, who has found areas of genuine interest and genuine practice, who has built habits of real engagement with ideas and with their own inner life, this person does not have the same relationship with time. They have things they genuinely want to do. Not vague aspirations about doing more or being better, but specific, real, immediate activities that call to them, that they look forward to, that give shape and direction to their hours. And this changes everything about how time feels. The hour set aside for reading becomes something you actually want rather than something you are supposed to want. The 20 minutes for reflection becomes a genuine pleasure rather than a discipline. The notebook you return to each morning becomes a companion rather than a task. And when these activities are genuinely desired rather than merely duty fulfilled, the whole texture of the day changes. You move through it with more energy, more direction, more of the sense that you are actually living rather than merely enduring. This is not a small thing. The difference between a life lived with genuine direction and genuine desire, and a life lived in the familiar drift of habit and reaction and passive consumption, is not a marginal difference in happiness. It is a categorical difference in the quality of existence. And the means to that categorical difference, in Bennett's view, are not grand or expensive or rare. They are available to anyone. They are a few daily habits, a few protected hours, a genuine commitment to the development of your own mind. He writes, near the end of Mental Efficiency, something that I find genuinely moving, even now, more than a century after he wrote it. He writes that the purpose of all of this, the attention, the reading, the reflection, the discipline and the enthusiasm and the patient cultivation of a richer inner life, the purpose is not to produce a more impressive person. It is to produce a more alive one. A person who is genuinely present in their own existence. A person for whom the world is genuinely interesting rather than merely passing. A person who has earned, through their own honest effort, the capacity to be moved by beauty, to be genuinely engaged by ideas, to love what they love with real intelligence and real depth rather than mere sentiment. This is what the developed mind gives you, real experience. Not the simulation of experience, not the performance of engagement, not the impression of a rich life maintained for the benefit of others, but the genuine article. The feeling of actually being here, in your own life, with your own mind, fully present to what is actually happening. And here, perhaps, is where Bennett's book ultimately arrives, and where all the practical advice and all the method and all the specific recommendations for habits and reading and reflection and attention finally lead, to the recognition that the point is not efficiency for its own sake. Efficiency is not a virtue in isolation. A perfectly efficient machine that produces nothing of value is not worth admiring. Bennett's efficiency was always in service of something, the richest possible human life, lived fully, experienced deeply, engaged with honestly, and inhabited with all the resources of a genuinely developed mind. That is the offer on the table. That is what mental efficiency is ultimately about. Not a productivity system, not a self-optimization program. A vision of what it means to be fully human, and a practical, compassionate, honest guide to moving toward that vision, one small daily choice at a time. You already have what you need to begin. You have the mind. You have the time, more than you might think, if you look carefully. You have the curiosity that brought you here, that made you want to spend time with these ideas. The question is simply whether you will take the next step, the small, undramatic, completely achievable step of building one genuine habit around one thing you genuinely want to develop. Bennett believed you would. He wrote his book in that belief. He wrote it for the person who has always suspected they had more in them than their current life was drawing out, and who needed not permission, because they already had that, but method, encouragement, and the honest reassurance that the work is worth doing. It is worth doing. The evidence of everyone who has done it is consistent on this point. The mind that is developed and genuinely engaged is a better place to live than the mind that is not. The life animated by genuine curiosity and genuine practice is a richer life than the life drifted through on autopilot. And the small daily choices that build that life are available to you, in the hours you already have, beginning with the very next one. But let us not leave without sitting with the most important truth that runs beneath everything else Bennett wrote, because it is the kind of truth that sounds simple and is actually enormous. The relationship between what you know and who you become is not incidental. It is the whole thing. Most people think of knowledge as something you accumulate, like objects placed on a shelf. You read a book, you absorb its contents, you file it away, and you move on to the next one. Under this model, learning is acquisitive. It is about collection, and the measure of your learning is the size of your collection. Bennett saw this entirely differently. For him, knowledge was not something you had. It was something that happened to you. Real learning, the kind that changes you, does not merely add to a collection. It restructures the collection itself. It reshapes the shelves. It alters the very way the room is organized, so that everything you encounter afterward is processed through a fundamentally different apparatus than the one that existed before you began. This is a more demanding standard than the acquisitive model, and a more honest one. It requires not just reading but engaging, not just exposure but genuine digestion, not just the passive reception of information but the active wrestling with ideas until they have become part of how you actually think, rather than just part of what you know. The test for whether something has genuinely gone in is simple and elegant. You know it has gone in when you start to think in its terms without deliberately trying to. When the framework from a book you read 6 months ago quietly suggests itself as a way of understanding something you encounter today. When an author's way of seeing has become, in some small measure, a piece of your own way of seeing. When you find yourself, in the middle of an ordinary conversation, reaching for an idea you encountered in reading and finding it perfectly fitted to the moment. That is real learning. That is knowledge that has moved from the shelf into the living tissue of thought. This kind of deep learning is slower. It requires the active engagement we have been talking about throughout, the questioning, the reflecting, the connecting, the writing, the discussing. But its product is something that passive consumption can never produce, a genuinely durable understanding that transfers across situations, that remains useful years after the original encounter, that becomes part of the permanent furniture of your mind rather than a decoration that fades with the season. Bennett also wrote, with characteristic honesty, about forgetting. Most people are troubled by it. They feel that if they cannot recall what they read, the reading was wasted. But Bennett saw forgetting differently. Even the ideas you can no longer consciously access, the books whose specific arguments have softened with time, leave a residue. They shape the texture of your thinking in ways that are real even when they are not visible. The person you are today is, in some genuine and unmeasurable way, a product of everything you have ever truly engaged with, including the things you cannot specifically remember. The investment was not wasted. It was absorbed. It is in you, even when you cannot point to it directly. This is not a license for lazy reading. The effort to retain, through notes and reflection and active engagement, is genuinely valuable. The material you can consciously access is more useful than the material that has faded. But it is an argument against the perfectionism that sometimes stops people from engaging at all, for fear that they will not retain enough to justify the effort. Read anyway. Engage anyway. The imperfect retention of something genuinely encountered is infinitely more valuable than the perfect non-reading of something left unopened on the shelf. And this connects, finally, to something about happiness that Bennett believed deeply, a kind of happiness that is more durable than anything circumstance can provide, and more available than most people realize. The developed mind, he argued, is more capable of genuine happiness than the undeveloped one. Not because intelligence guarantees joy, the world offers ample evidence that it does not. But because the specific qualities he was advocating, genuine engagement, authentic curiosity, the ability to find deep interest in the materials of ordinary life, the stability that comes from having a rich inner life, these qualities make a person less dependent on external conditions for their sense of well-being. Less at the mercy of what happens to them. More capable of finding, in any circumstance, something worth thinking about, something worth engaging with, something that makes the day feel like it was genuinely lived rather than merely endured. The person whose contentment depends entirely on everything going well is fragile in a way that life will eventually expose. Things go wrong. They go wrong for everyone, sooner or later, in one form or another. And the person who has built nothing interior, who has developed no genuine resources within themselves, will find, when things go wrong, that they have nowhere to stand. Whereas the person who has spent years building a genuine inner life, a mind that is genuinely interesting to inhabit, full of ideas and questions and the quiet pleasure of ongoing learning, this person carries something that misfortune cannot easily take. Something that remains when other things fall away. This is one of the most practical arguments Bennett makes, though it does not look practical on the surface. It looks like a case for the life of the mind, which can seem like a luxury. But it is actually a case for resilience, for the specific, durable kind of resilience that comes not from hardening yourself against the world but from developing enough richness within yourself that you always have resources to draw on. The well-developed mind is not invulnerable. It is equipped, and equipped is the best any of us can realistically hope for. There are two kinds of life, Bennett says, at the deepest level of his argument. The first is the life lived on the surface, reactive, shaped by external circumstance, driven by the opinions and expectations of others, moving through days without the quality of engagement that would make those days genuinely inhabitable. This is not a terrible life in any dramatic sense. For many people, it is perfectly comfortable. It simply is, in Bennett's view, a diminished one. A life that is happening to you, rather than a life you are actively, consciously, deliberately living. The second is the life lived from the inside out, driven by genuine values, animated by genuine curiosity, shaped by deliberate choices about what matters and what does not, moving through days with the quality of attention and engagement that makes them worth having lived. This life is not necessarily more impressive from the outside. It does not guarantee wealth or recognition or fame. But it is, in the deepest sense, more fully human. It is the life of someone who is genuinely here, genuinely present, genuinely alive to what is happening, both in the world and in themselves. The path between these two kinds of life is precisely what this book describes. It is not dramatic. It does not require you to abandon your current existence or reinvent yourself overnight. It requires only the quiet, persistent, daily choice to engage more honestly with your own mind, to take your own development a little more seriously, to use the hours you have with a little more intention than you have been using them. That is all. And every day that you make that choice, you become slightly more capable of making it the following day, until it is no longer a choice but simply the way you live. And the person that way of living makes you is someone you will be genuinely glad to be. That, without any further decoration, is what Arnold Bennett set out to say. And it is, as he always intended it to be, more than enough. So take it with you. Not as a system, not as a program, not as a set of rules to follow perfectly. Take it as an invitation to go deeper into the life you are already living. To bring more of yourself to the hours you already have. To treat your own mind as the remarkable, trainable, endlessly interesting thing that it is, rather than a fixed quantity to be endured or exploited. You already have everything you need to begin. Begin today. Begin imperfectly. Begin with whatever is available to you in whatever margin of time you can protect. And then begin again tomorrow. That is the whole of it. Thank you, from the bottom of this channel's heart, for spending this time with these ideas. If this summary has moved something in you, if it has given you even one thought worth carrying forward, then it has done exactly what it was made to do. Please like and subscribe to Audiobook Library, if you have not already done so. It costs you nothing and it helps this channel grow in ways that allow us to keep making content like this for people who genuinely want it. Every subscription, every like, Every share is a real contribution to something we are building here together, one video at a time. And please take a moment to explore the rest of our video library. There are many more great books waiting for you there. Books about the mind, about character, about history and human nature and the art of living well, each one summarized with the same care and attention that went into this one. Your next great idea, the one that might quietly change the direction of your thinking, could be just one more video away. We will see you there. Keep reading, keep thinking, keep building.